Alexandri, I see that you've raised your hand here in Zoom. If you have anything that you'd like to address, perhaps you could put it into chat and we'll respond through chat. We'll start the webinar exactly on the hour. Hello everybody, a very warm welcome to the first in a series of RTRS webinars. Today we're meeting on innovations in sustainable finance, and I'd like to welcome the RTRS President, Marina Born, to open the first webinar. Welcome, Marina.
Good morning, everyone. My warm welcome to the first session of 2020 RTRS webinar series, which we're opening today with great enthusiasm and expectations. As a global multi-stakeholder platform on soil, we constantly strive to make RTRS a wider arena to promote discussion where ideas and decisions impact and benefit all stakeholders across the soy value chain. At the moment, there are many players, organizations, initiatives, projects and tools coexisting, interacting, and trying to find the best approach to transform the soy value chain. Our role in this scenario, far beyond certification, is to open up spaces where we can all come together, discuss, collaborate better, and co-create meaningful solutions. Probably the best practical expression of this role is RTRS, the annual global conference, which this year, for reasons we all know, has not been held. But RTRS also conducts field trips, sets up technical working groups, brings together task forces in Brazil and soon again in Europe. And to keep the roundtable rolling and stay connected, we're now working on this agenda for virtual meetings. 2020 RTRS webinar series opens today with this first session on innovations in green finance. We truly believe that joint work, shared information, partnerships, use of existing tools and development of incentives and economic instruments are all enablers to achieve sustainability goals. We need to connect every point of this wide and complex soybean sector network. So now, on behalf of RTRS, we start the meeting. I wish to thank our high-level speakers and the organizations they represent, Rabobank, International Finance Corporation, and Climate Bond Initiative for materializing this webinar. Today, we're bringing together over 100 people whom we also thank for their interest in joining us. We look forward to their active participation. I would now like to turn the floor over to our partner and facilitator, James Allen, who will give us more details on how this meeting will proceed. We hope we all leave this webinar with updated information, more tools, new ideas, and motivation to transform our soy value chain. I am sure this will be a great meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marina. Welcome, everybody. Fantastic to have so many people on the call. We're over 120 already and more people joining. So great to get started with so many on the webinar. Just by way of an introduction, let me just give a quick sense of how this webinar fits into a broader series that RTRS is organizing. So throughout 2020, and as Marina said, in the lead up to the next RT, which will now be in 2021, RTRS is organizing a series of webinars that include themes around European regulation that we're seeing coming in, debates between supply and demand and how certification can respond to that, innovations and digitalization of the soy supply chain, and then today we have this fantastic set of panelists to talk about innovations in sustainable finance. And what RTRS is trying to achieve here is really keep the community around RTRS engaged, showcase some innovation and some latest thinking that's useful to different actors within the value chain who are working on issues around soy responsibility and sustainability, and also present how RTRS sees the responsible and sustainable landscape developing over the next year and years. So that's what we'll be doing throughout a series of webinars in 2020. I think you'll see on your screens now a series of objectives, and I think it's really interesting and exciting that we're talking today about sustainable finance. Sustainable finance here in Brazil has moved from the finance sectors of the paper to the front pages, and many of you will have seen that a group of investors sent a letter to the Brazilian government, to the group of investors representing $4 trillion worth of investments, asking questions about deforestation rates and the government's response to that. And what's been really interesting here in Brazil is to see how there's a lot of debate around the role of finance that can be played there. The result of that letter was a meeting between the investors, that was last week, a meeting between the investors and the Vice President of Brazil, the Ministers of the Environment, the Economy and Agriculture, and the Brazilian government's mobilizing quickly, not necessarily as a direct result of that letter, but as a result of increasing dialogue and increasing pressures to address issues around sustainable agricultural supply chains and sustainability and deforestation more broadly. And we've seen already a number of responses from the Brazilian government, including a new fund for payments for environmental services that the Ministry of the Environment's launched recently, the Vice President's National Plan for Controlling Illegal Deforestation. So we're really seeing, I think, two key things from as a result of this. One is the role that the finance sector has to play in driving forward a green, responsible, a sustainable agenda, and that's growing daily and growing fast. And I think it also shows that there's an increasing interest in sustainable finance, what it means, how it can support more sustainable value chains, and we see that growing as well. So I think what's exciting today is that we have on the panel a series of specialists on sustainable finance, but we're speaking to a lay audience in the sense that we're speaking to actors across the value chain. People who are producers, who are consumers of soy, who are consumer-facing organizations, who represent governments, non-governmental organizations, finance institutions, etc. So it's an opportunity for us to really engage with a theme that's becoming important. And these are the objectives that we want to achieve then. We want to help you to understand the link between sustainable finance and sustainable development through examples, and we've got a series of really fantastic examples today. We want to specifically delve deeply. One of those examples is the Climate Bonds Initiative, and it's exciting to see the discussions that are going on between CBI and the Brazil government and the Argentinian government. And we're going to leave space at the end of the discussion, at the end of the webinar for a discussion. So really keen to engage people who are on this call with the issues that are critical to you. This is the agenda for today. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but just to give you a sense then, once I've finished here, just with some practical information, I'm going to hand over to Martin Biermans, who's the head of sustainable markets at Rabobank. Martin's going to be moderating a discussion between the panelists. We've invited actors from Rabobank, from the IFC, and from the Climate Bonds Initiative, each to speak for 10 minutes on these key themes that you can see here. And then we'll have a 15-minute discussion amongst the panelists themselves, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor, and I'll explain to you shortly how we do that. So we really want people to be engaging with the panelists as well for the final half an hour of the webinar. Practical information then. If you have questions to the panelists, we'd like to invite you to do that using Slido. Slido is a polling tool. It's very simple. You just open up a tab in your browser, slido.com, and in the option you put RTRS, in the hashtag option, place RTRS there. I'll also provide a link in chat shortly for you to be able to do that, and we'll keep reminding you of the opportunity to place those questions. We're using Slido because it's also a tool that prioritizes questions. So even if you don't want to ask a question, I would suggest you just open Slido and see the questions that are coming in and click on the ones that you like, that you think are most interesting for us to ask our panelists. We do have a chat option in Zoom. We'd like to use that chat option for general comments. So if you have any comments about what's being said, please use that. If you have any technical issues, whether it's with translation, with anything else, then please send a direct message through chat either to myself, or you'll find Ingrid amongst the list of participants here on the call as well. So any technical issues, please deal with that way. And finally, and quite importantly, we're offering simultaneous translation throughout this webinar. Zoom is fantastic in that respect. If you are a native Portuguese or Spanish speaker and would like to be listening to this webinar in Portuguese or Spanish, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, if you push the mouse down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see an option of interpretation. So you should click on that, and then you should choose your native language. If you're a native English speaker and don't speak Spanish and Portuguese, click on the option of English as well, just in case anybody who wants to speak in Portuguese does so, and you'll be able to hear them in English. So that's how you guarantee simultaneous translation throughout the webinar. If you're a Spanish or a Portuguese speaker, as I'm speaking now, I'm hoping that you'll be listening to me in your native language. Okay, I think that's it for practical information. And I'm delighted to hand over to today's moderator, Martin Biermans, who's the head of sustainable markets at Rabobank in the Netherlands. Welcome, Martin.
James, thank you so much for that introduction, and indeed a great honor to be here and in this virtual conference with you all. We've got some really excellent speakers to talk on about a topic that is very dear to my heart. But while reflecting on the particular topic, sustainable finance, and you know, the relationship between finance and sustainability, I was remembered of the famous quote from the movie Wall Street of 1987, wherein the golden gecko, the character golden gecko, looks to the audience and says the, well, by now infamous words, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. And the whole greed is good mantra was, of course, a clear indictment of how the financial sector completely lost its way during the 1980s and well into the 1990s. Interestingly, by the way, the actor Michael Douglas years later indicated that at various dinners he had sat next to bankers who confided to him that they actually chose a career in banking because of his character in the movie Wall Street, upon which Michael Douglas said, well, you do realize he's the bad guy. But apparently that really didn't sink in. Now, the reason that I'm referring to this famous quote is that in more recent years, we now see that finance is increasingly incorporating sustainability and wider societal notions, even to the extent that that we might actually discuss today the theorem green is good, and maybe there we can actually see a new development in finance, and of course also in relation with the wonderful work that the RTRS is doing. We've got some excellent speakers lined up. My colleague Lianne van Leijsen from Rabobank will kick off, but we also have Cassio and Jessica from the IFC and Justin from the Climate Bonds Initiative. And I'm very well honored to hand over the reins, to give the stage to my colleague Lianne. But before we do that, can we go back one slide, please? These are the type of questions that we want to discuss during this particular webinar. And also, I think we should be able to answer all of these questions at the end of the webinar. And I think one of the key, and the first one is actually of utmost importance. How can sustainable finance meaningful contribute towards sustainable development? And I think that's a very important question that we should be debating. Now, as I said, I'm very pleased to be able to hand over the reins and the stage to Lianne, because to be quite honest, nothing says go back to the gym better than looking at yourself on the screen. So Lianne van Leijsen, please take it away.
Lianne, you're on mute. If you could start again, you'll need to unmute yourself before you start. Thank you.
Okay. You hear me?
Okay. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Maarten. Also, of course, delighted and honored to be able to speak on this webinar. If we move to the slide, the first slide, please, James. So what this slide shows is that sustainable finance actually has grown strongly over the last years, not only in terms of volume, but also in terms of the various type of solutions that there are. And there is a very important reason that this is happening. There are three key reasons. First of all, these type of instruments have a really high communication value. Linking funding to your sustainability ambitions gives a very strong signal to your internal stakeholders and your external stakeholders on your commitment to sustainability. It also allows companies to attract funding from investors that have a strong ESG focus. And that is mainly the case if we look at green and sustainable bonds. And the third reason is that these type of solutions can actually have a pricing benefit for companies. companies can receive a margin benefit if they achieve certain predetermined sustainability goals. We as Rabobank also play a very active and leading role in sustainable finance. So the next slide shows the activity in our transactions. It is an overview of the transactions that we did with our clients over the last years. We have a strategy to actively engage with our clients on a regular basis on sustainability and their sustainability ambitions. And in many of these transactions that we see here on the slide, we have actually structured the sustainability element in the financing solution. So although we see that sustainable finance has grown strongly in the last years, it is also still very new. And there are really a lot of different terms in the market when you speak about sustainable finance. So we have to be clear on what we mean when we talk about sustainable finance. And this is why we have created a sustainable finance framework in Rabobank that defines the term sustainable finance and sets the minimum standard to create these type of solutions. If you could move to the next slide, James, please. So if you look at sustainable finance, actually, it is a normal financing solution. So it can be any financial service or financial product, but in this particular case, we include a specific sustainability component. And the sustainability component has the purpose of having a positive impact on the SDGs. And when we say positive impact, we mean a meaningful and measurable impact on the SDGs. At the same time, we do not want the sustainability component to have to significantly harm any of the SDGs, and we have included for Rabobank the topics of our sustainability policies. And it is also very important that this is not for any company, but we look at the client itself and determine whether the client follows good governance practices. And by this we mean, are we talking about a client that is really serious about sustainability in their strategy and in their policies? So if we look deeper into what the sustainability component in a financing solution would be, there are actually two ways to structure the sustainability component. So James, maybe you can move to the next slide. The first option is to link the performance of the company to favorable financing conditions. So you can link the margin, the pricing to certain predefined sustainability targets. These sustainability targets can be based on an ESG rating, so like for example Sustainalytics, but it can also be individual targets, like for example GHG emissions, your water consumption, but it can also be linked, for example, to achieving certification like ASC, but also like RTRS. In order for this type of solution to be credible in the market, it is very important that we look at targets that are material to the business and the sector that the company operates in, and that the targets are actually ambitious. And for this, we chose to look at credible, international, recognized external standards. The other type of financing solution we see in the market is where we link the use of proceeds of the financing solution to green or social projects. If the financing is dedicated only to green projects, we would speak about a green finance. And if it's a combination, you would talk about a sustainable finance. For this type of solution to be credible to the market, it is very important to be clear on how we define an economic sustainable activity. And for this, we also use credible external standards, like for example, the taxonomy that is being developed by the European Union on environmentally sustainable economic activities. This is actually a classification system, an economic list, a list of economic activities that define whether the activity is sustainable or not. But we do not only use the taxonomy, we also use other important external standards like the Climate Bond Initiative. Can we move to the next slide, please, James? It is very important to understand that you can apply this to all type of financial solutions. So it's not only for loans, it's not only for credit facilities. You can apply it to the whole product suite that a bank has to offer, and that is also what we do. If you look at the position of Rabobank, we actually have a unique position in the market because we finance the whole supply chain. So we finance companies, farm input companies, we finance farmers, we finance traders, we finance processing, and we finance retailers. So we finance the whole supply chain, and we apply the concept of sustainable finance to this whole supply chain in order to improve sustainable supply chains. And I have listed 3 examples here under that I would like to briefly mention. For example, on the retailer side, Ahold Delhaize, a large retailer, recently issued a sustainability bond, and a large part of the bond is actually spent on sustainable procurement. The example in the middle on COFCO is one of the largest ever sustainability-linked loans to a commodity trader. In this facility, the pricing is linked to improving the sustainability rating of COFCO, so the Sustainalytics rating, but also there is a KPI on full traceability of soy sourced directly from farmers. And if we move then a little bit more further in the chain, we have the example of a loan we did for the largest Brazilian farmer, where we actually provided a loan with a longer term than we would normally do to finance his investments in innovation, in innovating new farming practices like subsoiling, which is expected to increase the yield and therefore in the end avoid deforestation. And if you could move to the last slide, please, James. So I would like to conclude with a sustainability-linked loan that we did for AgroSuper. AgroSuper is one of the largest salmon producers of the world. And the KPIs in this loan are basically all linked to achieving ASC certification. So that ranges from the percentage of production centers of AquaChile, which is the salmon producing operating company of AgroSuper, to intermediate steps. So it's the percentage of production centers, but it's also the intermediate steps like reducing the usage of antibiotics and the improvement of community relations based on the standards of ASC certification. And this loan really is the crown on a strategic partnership that Rabobank started in 2011 with WWF and the Chilean salmon sector to materially improve sustainability in this sector. And the need to invest in sustainability became very clear for this sector after the salmon disease crisis in 2009, where basically this sector lost its export markets to the disease. And the success of the partnership is really that we defined together clear goals, clear ambitions to improve sustainability in the salmon sector. And we are currently in the process of doing 2 additional loans for other salmon producers that also participated in this project. And we think it's a nice example where we're able to work in such a partnership and where we combine our network, our knowledge, and our financial institutions solutions to really contribute to sustainability. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that very good introduction into sustainable finance, and also managing to show how cool Rabobank is. But that's a side note. Now we have two speakers from the IFC, and they will be talking about all the work that they are doing in terms of supplier finance. Cassio, Senior Agribusiness Latin America Advisor, and Jessica, the Program Officer of Global Trade Supplier Finance Program. So, Cassio, Jessica, the floor is absolutely yours, and take it away.
Okay, Martin, thanks very much. This is Cassio speaking. First of all, I would like to thank very much RTRS, also in the name of Marina and Marcelo and the team. It's a pleasure to be back here presenting within this RTRS webinar. So we're going to share the presentation. I'm going to go with the first 4 slides, and then Jessica goes with the next slides. So we're going to focus mostly on our approach on sustainable supply chain program, and basically on also some of the activities we have been doing in Brazil. So I don't know if you know, IFC is a member of the World Bank Group. We work both with investment, with advice, and also with resource mobilization activities. We are a AAA credit rating, and we are owned by 185 countries. We are part of the UN global system. And we have a physical structure and offices in nearly 100 countries. And therefore, we are the largest global development institution, and we focus mostly in emerging markets. That's where we put most of our resources and our efforts. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, we have the investment pillar, the advice pillar, and the mobilization pillar. Both me and Jessica, we sit on the advice pillar. What I would like to present here is that all of our investment, advice, and mobilization are strongly connected to the IFC performance standards. So all of the things that we do, either related to investment, they're all strongly connected to sustainability targets. The IFC performance standards is a solid reference, not only for the financial sector, but for other investors. So anything that we do is strongly guided by sustainability. Next slide, please. So moving a little bit now to Brazil and to the soy. So what we have been doing now in Brazil, what I have been doing here, we have been working with clients to develop traceability system and to screen those supplies against sustainability criteria. We also have been supporting farmers groups to reach credible certification, such as RTRS, which is the one that are ranked by IFC as a credible standard. We also have been training some of the farmers along the supply of our clients on sustainability and better practice. These are the things we do with clients. And then we have some sector level approach, and our strong focus today is on this whole discussion on how to stimulate soy production over degraded pasture. And in that case, we are focusing specifically in the Cerrado and in this region of the Cerrado called Mato Piba. So we are starting to work with some pilots on mapping the region and also the development of business case so that we can compare what is the economic case for expanding on degraded pasture versus business as usual of clearing native vegetation. One thing that we're going to do also together with RTRS is to build a business case on soy certification. So we want to create what's the economic logic behind moving to credible certification. And then what I'm doing here in Brazil as well, I'm trying to bring this global initiative that Jessica is going to explain, which connects very deeply to sustainable finance. We're going to try to bring this to the soy in South America. So this is the GTSF, is the Global Trade Supplier Finance Program, which Jessica is going to introduce to us in the next slide. So please, Jessica, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Cassio, and it's a pleasure to be here. So as Carcio mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about one of our sustainable finance products, which is called the Global Trade Supplier Finance Program, or GTSF. And this program, sorry, James, could you go back to the prior slide, please? Great, thanks. So GTSF is a program that was established in 2010. And this is a joint investment and advisory program. And essentially what this program does is it shortens the amount of time that it takes an emerging market supplier to get paid by an international buyer. As Leanne mentioned before, this product falls into the category of sustainability. It's a sustainability-linked program. So the interest rate that the supplier pays to get this short-term financing or to get paid early is based on the supplier's social and environmental performance. So as the supplier improves that performance, then the interest rate gets progressively lower. One other benefit of this program is because we're working with both suppliers and buyers, the pricing of this program is actually linked to the buyer's credit rating. So in most cases, the buyer will be a much larger company with better access to finance. So this product is able to offer the pricing that the supplier pays is based on the buyer's credit strength. So in most cases, this ends up being a lot less expensive for the supplier. Next slide, please. And so as I mentioned before, this program shortens the amount of time it takes the supplier to get paid. So in many of the sectors where this program is active and in agribusiness as well, there are sometimes payment terms between the buyers and the suppliers. So a supplier may grow a product, process the product, and then ship the product to the end buyer. And in many cases, the supplier has to wait anywhere from 30 to 120 days to actually get paid by the buyer. So what this program does is we come in, and as soon as the supplier ships the goods to the buyer, as soon as they invoice the buyer, and then as soon as the buyer approves that invoice for payment, we come in and advance the funds to the supplier. So that usually takes about 5 days. So we're sending the funds directly to the supplier, and then 90 days later, when the buyer would typically pay, we get paid by the buyer. So it's sort of we're advancing the money and then eventually getting paid by the buyer when the payment when the invoice matures. Next slide, please. One other thing to mention is that all of these transactions take place over something called the supply chain finance platform, which is essentially a web-based tool that allows the buyer, the supplier, and IFC to interact. So each time a supplier would like to get paid early or would like this financing, they can log into the platform. They can see the invoices that they've submitted to the buyer, which ones have been approved, when they expect that money to normally come in, and if they want it to come in early, they can click on the platform, click the invoice for financing, and then the platform instructs us as IFC to send the funds directly to the supplier. So the benefit of these sort of platforms is that all of the parties can interact, see what's going on, and then also because it's all web-based, we're able to onboard tens or hundreds of suppliers that all pertain to a particular buyer. So it extends our reach of the program and essentially allows us to process thousands of financing requests a day. Next slide, please. Okay, great, thanks. And then so as I mentioned before, the interest rate that the supplier pays is based on their sustainability performance. And the way that we determine the criteria is we sit down together with the buyer, and we want to understand what are the buyer's objectives in terms of sustainability. So once we understand that, we structure the program based on different criteria. It could be based on if the buyer has an existing rating system to rate their suppliers. If that's something like gold, silver, and bronze, then we can link the interest rates to those existing ratings. If they want suppliers to achieve certification, then certification can be at the gold level, for example, and different steps leading up to certification could be at the lower levels. And that's essentially how it works. But we're always working together with the buyer to establish what the criteria are, and then those same criteria apply to all of the buyer's suppliers. And just as some background, so we started this concept of sustainability-linked supply chain finance back in 2014. A lot of our experience in this product has been in the apparel sector. So we have several programs with apparel brands. Our first one with Levi's, and then the two deals that followed after the Levi's model were with Nike and Puma. We've since expanded into agribusiness, and as Casio mentioned, we're working to build this and implement this product more in the soy sector, and we're working on, in fact, right now working on our first project that includes soy. So that's it. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the questions.
And many questions are coming in via Slido, which is excellent. We love to see that. I've seen some really interesting questions, so I'm completely at ease and fully relaxed because I know we're going to have a really, really good discussion after it. But before we discuss and go deeper into what we have already heard, I would like to give the floor to Justine from the Climate Bonds Initiative, and had to share some of her additional insights in what's happening in sustainable finance. Justin.
Thank you, Martin. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you to everyone for participating today. Good morning and good afternoon to wherever you are in the world, and of course to RTRS for having me speak today. It's quite a pleasure to be a part of this kickoff to RTRS's webinar series. Yeah, so I think just stepping back before diving into the presentation, I think it's important, many of you listening today may not be aware of Climate Bonds Initiative or even really been hearing about green bonds or sustainable finance for the first time. So just to give a bit of context, CBI, Climate Bonds Initiative, is a global organization that came together in 2009 as a nonprofit. Its main goal is to drive institutional capital towards climate change solutions. And when we came together in those early days, there was very little to speak of when discussing a labeled bond market. A few examples of this had been put forward by World Bank, European Investment Bank. Mostly the development finance institutions have been very much the pioneer of driving the development of this market. But the concept being that if we can leverage large-scale institutional capital towards addressing our climate change investment needs, we will be able to transition more rapidly. Of course, that does require a number of different components to make that match make in heaven between the investor and the investment. But what we've seen in the last 10 years is exceptional. We have seen a market grow quite rapidly. But CBI has played a role in being a capacity builder, being a connector to the market participants, whether we're talking about governments, national and local, whether we're talking about banks as the intermediaries to help make the deals come together. Of course, allowing for investors to have assurance in what that they are investing in, and of course, educating issuers on what they need to be putting in place so the investment can happen. And so we very much played a coordination, catalytic role, educating and building into capacity, but we've also been providing the market with market intelligence, with our market data, reporting, and of course our regional programs that span from Asia to Africa to Europe and across the Americas. CBI has been present in Brazil, most notably since 2015. And as I go through the presentation, I will elaborate a bit more on what that work is. So if we could go to the first slide, please. So picking up on Jana's opening remarks on sustainable finance, I'm going to hone in a little bit more specifically to green bonds. Green bonds have really been the poster child of the sustainable finance movement in the last 10 years. 2014 was really the years coined of the green bond, following notable issuances coming out of IFC, of course. Their benchmark issuance in 2014 really spurred the market and allowed for particularly corporates to look at that model and say, you know, look, this is something that we could easily do. And essentially what that means is, you know, looking at an existing portfolio, identifying projects and assets that clearly meet an environmental objective, and structuring the bond in a way that provides transparency and disclosure to the investor and the market on what is being invested in. So the two major components in these products, and this will also go if you're talking about sustainability or social labeled bonds, is it's about what's being financed. 100% eligible projects and assets that fit an environmental objective. So that might be you know, renewable energy projects across the energy fields. You're looking at sustainable water projects that may have resilience underpinned with those projects. You could end up having low carbon transport projects. Essentially, 100%, there's tools out there that help guide the eligibility criteria. And then, of course, there's the reporting component. You know, how are the proceeds being managed? How are they being reported on? And so on and so forth. So this is essentially the fundamental differences between that and a regular bond. And as you can see, from 2014 and on to 2019 into 2020, we've seen exceptional growth, and we've also seen a diversification of different types of issuers, anywhere from non-financial to financial corporates, development banks continuing to be leveragers, but also issuers, and then of course within government space. China coming into this in 2015, 2016, they basically issued about $40 billion alone from zero in 2015. And then of course in 2017, we saw the rise of sovereign issuances. And, you know, it's important to note that this is a market that may have begun with development finance, you know, World Bank groups issuing, and then of course Europe really taking hold of this market and also leading the way. But this is very much a global market now. This issuance is popping up all over the world, across Southeast Asia, China, India, Central Asia, Africa, really not limited to just one part of the world. And that's a really important note to make, that especially when we're focusing on the emerging markets, where can we begin to tap a new source of capital, potentially cheaper sources of capital, to be able to finance the transition that we all need to be making in our local economies, and especially in light of COVID, which goes to show that the world is not prepared for shocks in the system. And so we do need to start investing in more sustainable pathways to be able to resist those shocks in the future. To the next slide, please. So honing in specifically within the Brazil context and Latin America as a whole, as you can see here, giving you a mapping of what we've seen to date, we began to see issuance coming out of Brazil around the 2017 was really the biggest year of issuance that we saw. And most of what was coming out was the export industries. You know, what we've seen in all markets really beginning to tap into this market is the low-hanging fruit comes first. So where you have large corporations, or in some cases governments that are sitting on an existing portfolio that meets the bill, meets the criteria of what's eligible, and repackages that and sells that off into the market, where investors' demand is really incredibly insatiable. I mean, I cannot underestimate the level of demand that is coming from international investors, and slowly but surely educating the domestic front, you begin to see that demand happening locally as well. Investors are waking up to the risks that they have existing in their portfolios, whether that be climate risks, whether that be other environmental and social risks, where assets are either being wiped off the books or they're becoming a reputational risk, and so on and so forth, political risk and everything. And so investors are really looking at their investment decisions in a much different light, drastically, in the last 5 to 10 years, and especially what we've seen in Europe, where we've seen, you know, the Nordics most notably, who've been leading the way on this. This is now beginning to trickle across the world. It's not just limiting itself to Europe, it's also Asian buyers are also starting to take ESG integration very seriously. So what that means for producers, particularly for this webinar today, is that, you know, there's going to come a time where it is going to be increasingly difficult to access finance for your needs, and, you know, banking and public sector money is going to become limited. And so where are those new sources? And those new sources of capital may be very demanding. And so, you know, the transition is happening. How quickly can you move your business in that direction and reap the benefits of that? That's a lot of what CBI tries to focus on. So you can see here that we've had a diversity of different types of issuances. In Brazil, in the land use space, it's been mainly the pulp and paper industries, but we've also seen, you know, livestock industries like Mafrigi coming to market last year with their transition bonds. You know, we've seen other food production industry, so it's not just limited to them, but it is big players. Size is a big deal. If you're trying to tap the international market, you are looking at nothing less than about, you know, $350 million euro equivalent, excuse me, and localized issuance has also been happening, and that's been tapping at a much smaller scale, but still, you know, there is a size that needs to be met. And also, you know, like any other bond issuance, the credibility of that bond or debt product needs to be in place. Next slide, please. So I'm going to stay on this slide for just a minute, in the sense that the work that CBI began in Brazil was very much around just the concept of green bonds, reaching out to the market as a whole and really giving a 101 on what was happening globally, what this could mean for Brazil given its investment potential, and most notably its advancements in the sustainability field. That how can we start to now financially incentivize that? You know, a lot of it had been driven by international pressures in combination with pretty ambitious regulations. But where does the financial reward come into play? And green bonds, green finance began to present itself as that opportunity. So how do we start to connect the dots? And so we spent most of 2015 and 2016 with that, you know, huge outreach campaign that then 2017 started to hone in very specifically at the sustainable agriculture industry of Brazil, recognizing that there was a huge amount of potential, you know, estimating around, you know, 160 billion worth of investment opportunities. And so how do we start to create visibility across all these different areas that we can connect investors to, and of course support issuers in being able to put these products together. And so we started working with the government, most particularly with the Minister of Agriculture and Minister of Infrastructure and their teams, where we are building capacity and knowledge and understanding of what this market is. And of course, in the supply chain across, you know, the different agriculture industries, the livestock, renewable energy, forestry space, you know, the logistics support in that. We did a mapping we decided, let's start with looking at where the low-hanging fruit exists. This is a starting point for us to build on, a foundation we can build upon. So in June this year, just a few weeks ago, we launched Brazil's green investment for sustainable agriculture roadmap. And here we go in and hone in. You're giving a bit of a snapshot of some of the things that high level to give you a sense of what we're looking at, which are what are some of the advancements technologically wise innovation that Brazil has been doing in its agri industries that we can begin to package and start to connect that to investors that are looking for these types of investments, creating demand for these responsible investments. And I think that one of the challenges Brazil has had in the past is not being able to create that visibility, not being able to package accurately, and not knowing where that demand is. So we're trying to play that role of connecting all the dots. So this first roadmap is just to start to get the opportunities into play and into the market. A long road ahead of us, but of course, specific to today's webinar, the soy sector is critical. And where we can begin to start to, certified soy production into the hands of investors looking to this through green bond vehicles is the opportunity to be had. So I'll stop there and allow for us to go into deeper discussion as the webinar continues. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Justin, for taking this on this tour on what's happening on the frontiers of green bonds and indeed the climate bonds. Now, I know you have many questions, and I know this for a fact because I can see it on slido.com. But for those of you who do not know, go to the website slido.com and type in RTRS, and then you will be able to join the Q&A funnel, if you will, and then you can post your questions to the panel. And we'll actually get to a couple of these questions because I've seen a couple of really, really good ones. And also you can indicate which questions you like so that we'll address those during the Q&A. Now, I also like to point out, I think there was one question already posed by Bas Geerts, and he had a practical question: will the slide decks be shared after the webinar? Well, Bas, I can tell you they're not going to be shared after the webinar. They're being shared during the webinar. You can actually find in the chat overview, you can find a link, and if you click on that, you will be able to go to the slide deck, and you can go through it. But please pay attention, because now when we are going into the questions, that's of course where everything is going to come to a head. Now, I would like to kick off the question with a question to Lianne. We have heard now from IFC with their supplier finance program. Is this something that you're also looking at Rabobank, or can you share a little bit about that if you do?
Yes, thank you, Maarten. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So we have our own supplier finance platform for many years now, and I think in basic terms, it works the same as the way Jessica described it. So the supplier can get early payment on this platform and gets really an attractive funding rate because you work with the credit quality of the buyer. And we also have a structure in place where we can differentiate between the environmental and social performance of the supplier. So we can link it to, as also Jessica explained, to the own rating system of the companies that we are dealing with. You can also link it to certification. You can link it also to sustainability ratings that are already in the market. So yeah, we certainly do that, and we think it's a very strong tool to engage with the supply chain and on achieving improvements in sustainability in the supply chain. And on top of that, in addition to, if you like, diversifying between the first tier of your suppliers, so the tier 1 suppliers that directly deliver to the buyer. We also look at solutions where we actually engage tier 2 or tier 3 or tier 4 suppliers of the buyer. So the suppliers of the suppliers. And this really enables buyers, companies to engage deeper into the supply chain and take the opportunity to provide them maybe with more quality farm inputs. They have higher access to a working capital, and in the end, the buyer will have access to higher quality products, more sustainable products, and be able to secure sustainable sourcing better. So we do it the way IFC does, and we also look at alternative ways to structure these type of solutions.
Well, it's great to hear, and also good to know that the examples of IFC are being followed across the board. And that brings me to IFC with a question. And it's actually, I'm going to combine some of the questions that are coming into Slido. And again, please do keep the questions coming. But there were some questions surrounding what the possible impact is of COVID-19. So one of the questions is, will there be any structural changes in sustainable finance after COVID-19? But more specifically of Marcela Paranos, and maybe Marcela, if you want to ask the question yourself, you can, we can maybe, if you want to, and otherwise I will just read the question out loud. That's for IFC, a little bit more down, James. Well, I'll just read it out loud. So for IFC, does IFC see the debt restructuring needs raising from, it's going all the way up. The needs raising from COVID-19 scenario. Now I have to move this. Yes, as an opportunity for sustainability linked finance. And how? Okay, well, your starters for 10. Who wants to kick it off? Casio, Jessica? Jessica, you need to unmute yourself. Cheers.
Sorry about that, Martin.
Sure.
Okay. Sure, I can take this question. So I guess just to be clear, so the debt restructuring is on the long-term finance side, while this particular product that we're talking about is on the short-term financing side. And yes, we've seen that COVID-19 has affected many of our clients, and there has been a need in some cases for IFC to accommodate for the impact of COVID-19. It was, I guess, several months ago, right around the onset of the epidemic, IFC announced an $8 billion package, which was across the different departments within the IFC, focusing on COVID response. Just on how COVID has impacted this product in particular, what we have seen is that there has been a tremendous increase in interest, both from buyers and suppliers. Since we are only working with suppliers in emerging markets, we've seen some local banks really constrict their working capital funding at this time. So in cases where a supplier had, affordable and good access to local funding prior to COVID, we've seen that change and have had a lot more interest from suppliers in participating in the supply chain finance program. At the same time, buyers have also faced liquidity constraints and are extending their payment terms with suppliers. So I think the example that I used in my presentation was 90 days, But in the past couple of months, we've seen buyers, several buyers, extend, beyond 90 to 100, 120, 150 days, and that makes it very hard for suppliers. So a lot of buyers have come to us saying, we've had to extend our payment terms. Is there anything that you can do for our suppliers? So COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on this program, and it's great to have a structure like this in place, because it means when there are sort of unknown things, you can just sort of turn this financing on the supplier side and say, okay, now I need the funding now, and then it's available.
Thank you for that. And just to continue a little bit on one of the things that was also put up in Slido, and that of course is directly linked with what the RTRS is all about and what it's trying to do. And many of the people here are asking questions about, okay, how can we link sustainable finance with actual farmers and people on the ground and make that change happen? And well, I guess I'm first going to go to Justin, because Justin, can you maybe share some ideas of how the fairly macro, if not high over, of bonds, how can we sort of connect that with securing real change that is needed on the ground?
It's a really good question, because it always tends to be the first one that I get from the producer level, because it doesn't seem like it's that accessible when you're talking about a product that needs be about 300 million offshore to be able to get the attraction of the capital. And so, I've always looked at it as almost three different types of buckets. You've got the first bucket, which is the big multinationals, conglomerates, that they themselves have a huge supply chain, which some of the producers might be a part of, which could almost act like a quasi securitization piece, where you've got the multinational issuing a green bond, and the performance based off of the supply chain, producers meeting certain criteria are able to access that capital through the proceeds that come through, and it's all based off of performance. Or there's the second bucket, which is the one we try to focus on the most, which is still large scale to medium sized producers, but may not be able to just issue. Some can issue straightforward bond issuance, and that might come with assistance from development finance institutions, from guarantees or backings from other players that can take on the risk. Or you're looking at securitization, and very specifically into the Brazil context is CRAs, the credit receivables in agriculture. And these are, have been an alternative source of access to capital outside of just straightforward bank lending. So if we were looking at, a number of different soy producer players can come together in a almost securitized vehicle that then allows for issuance and access to capital that way, whether domestically or now with the new law regulation changing in Brazil, where other currencies are now acceptable, for example, dollar denominated and euro denominated CRAs. So that's now a new area of exploration on how we can start to access the ability for that. The smallholder farmers becomes a little bit more challenging, and that's again gonna have to be in something like securitization that allows for large scale product to come about, and de-risking around that. But these are some of the things that we're looking at now. Bank lending, for example, we're looking at Banco do Brazil, being able to repackage a lot of their existing loans to offshore bonds is one thing that's being discussed now, which in itself should be freeing up lending within the domestic market. So, I think what we need to be careful of is that it's not necessarily about creating anything new. It's more about leveraging what's already in place. How is money being moved within the economy? And what we're focusing on more so is the practices at hand, being able to package sustainable practices and match those to the investors, depending on what kind of debt products we have available to us, both domestically and internationally.
All right, thank you for that. And I'm just going to follow up on this theme because on Slido somewhere there were many various questions regarding farmers, and one was actually quite an intriguing question. Are there any examples of sustainable finance initiatives that are effective in supporting soy farmers to conserve native vegetation that they can legally convert? Well, that's I think a very concrete ask, and well, maybe Lianne, can you give some
Yes, I
reflections
can.
on that, and what type of initiatives are there? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, and actually it had going back to the example that I showed on one of my slides. So I don't know whether it's possible, James, to put that slide up again. We have the logo of Agri3. So if you look at the loan that we did to the largest farmer in Brazil, actually this is a soy producing farmer, and we were able to provide the longer term financing to this farmer because we work together in Agri3 with soft money. So with investments that we received from the Ministry of Finance here in the Netherlands, and also from the Global Environmental Facility. So we have created a fund which is focused on forest protection and the investment in the degraded land, actually to really help on the ground improvements in sustainability. So this particular farmer actually had an area on his land where he is legally allowed to deforest, but actually as part of the loan agreements that we made with this particular farmer, we provided a longer term and agreed with the farmer that actually he would not make use of his rights to deforest on this on his land. So yes, this is Agri3. I think for us is a really important instrument also to reach farmers and to help them invest in sustainable practices where the return on these practices may not be in the short term, but actually in the longer term. And maybe also had to address also what Justine was saying. We fully recognize the potential for financing farmers on a portfolio basis, on a securitization type of solutions where you pool loans to farmers together. That is also something we do in Brazil, and we do recognize the potential to work with these farmers to invest, to use these loans to invest in sustainability.
Hi, Martin. Can I just comment on this from the IFC perspective? So we also have clients specifically in the pulp and paper sector that have the same issue. They do have the legal permits to clear, and that's part of our agreement that they're not going to convert that land because they think it's still beneficial to have the IFC loan. I think that's a challenge in Brazil, specifically for the soy sector as we know it, but I think things are moving. There are some traders now offering also some loans which have a specific zero deforestation commitment on. So things are moving in that direction. So I think there are new products out there.
Okay, thank you for adding to that. I think that helps, and you know there's a lot of stuff happening there, and that is well good to hear. I also want to add a question for Jessica, because you showed the supplier finance arrangements with the various apparel companies. Could you share a little bit about how enthusiastic are these companies now? Is this going to be the new normal? Are all of their financing in that particular area going to be with you folks? Or can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I think when our journey started on this sustainability-linked pricing back in 2014, I think we may have been the first or one of the first banks that was offering this type of product, the sustainability-linked pricing supply chain finance. There are many banks, as Leanne mentioned before, like Rabobank, that offer this same product. But we've seen, over the past 6 years, we've seen this idea really pick up, and we're talking with commercial banks regularly about how we can work together to implement this product with companies that they already work with, or to help them do it alone. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of traction and a lot of increasing interest over the past 6 years. I wouldn't say that it's it's not the new normal yet, but I think we're getting there, and a lot has changed in this short period of time.
But will it be enough? Because one of the questions on Slido, and it's a question that I have also, I wouldn't say daily, but every other day. I mean, is it enough? I mean, the challenges from an environmental perspective are huge. From a social perspective, they are also huge. So, is this going fast enough, or, do we need to accelerate? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it would be great if we could accelerate it, and if every bank is looking, before implementing a supply chain finance solution, looking to tie it to sustainability, that would be exceptional. And I think, sort of as we've seen in some of the other presentations, there are many different ways that you can implement sustainable finance, and it's across different asset classes. So I mean, I think we're heading in the right direction. Perhaps it's, once we see that this is a requirement for every loan or every, supplier finance program, I would think that that's where we want to be.
Very good. Excellent. Yeah, because ultimately the question, and that's also coming from the Slido crowd. I mean, given the urgent need for action, can it be scaled up to realize industry transformation? Indeed, for example, ending deforestation from soy, and I guess more work needs to be done. And you know what? I'm just going to ask the panelists to think about this, and because I find it actually quite interesting that nowadays we live in a time wherein we give extra focus and extra attention to any company that actually commits to sustainable financing. Whereas, of course, we should actually now be heading towards a situation wherein any company that is not engaged in sustainability-linked financing should answer why not. So, but anyway, let's see if we can figure out how we can make that happen. That would be a good one. But I think Lianne actually raised her hands, and she actually got a question also for IFC, and that means that after that question and the answer, Justin, I'm coming for you. Lianne, unmute yourself, please.
Yes, Jessica, I was wondering whether in your programs, if you engage with the buyer and you assess the E&S performance of the suppliers, whether you have minimum standards and criteria that you use to validate the way the buyer assesses its suppliers, and maybe more particular, do they have to meet the IFC performance standards?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. We look at every buyer's environmental and social management system in great depth. and they're evaluated against the IFC performance standards. And we will not work with a buyer that's working whose environmental and social management system is not aligned with the performance standards.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's clear enough. Okay, so just going back to the industrialization or the transformation that is needed, Justin, I see tremendous amounts of money in your slides. I see huge amounts, piles of cash being directed towards sustainable finance, which is a good thing. At the same time, I'm wondering how much is this? I mean, how much are we talking about? Is this enough to move the needle, or do we still need to go after the investors and indeed all parties in the financial sector to really integrate sustainability in their capital allocation?
I mean, that's a good question, Martin. I mean, let's just look at how phenomenal the growth has been from in little as I'd say a 6 to 7 year period. We've gone from $3 billion to 800, but we're actually 850, 860 now billion of issuance globally. There's roughly 100 trillion of assets under management globally. And we're increasingly seeing investors take ESG, sustainability, and prioritizing that in their investment decisions. If I look at PGGM alone, who invests all over the world and in Latin America most specifically, they are moving a lot more towards the JP Morgan Index, ESG Index, when making their decisions. So I come back to my point about, you know, the access to finance is going to become over time more difficult, and it's going to happen within the next 10 years, if not sooner, to where these are going to be mandated. And, you know, especially if we go back to seeing what we've had with the investor community coming together and, you know, engaging the Brazilian government, you know, we will pull out from investing if we do not see the change required. And so I just think it's a survival of the fittest, really. Companies that are going to, you know, start to invest in this and also recognize that over time, economically, this makes more sense. Then of course that transformation is a lot easier, and of course it provides a competitive edge that you wouldn't have, you know, should you stay stale, as we would make, and do the business as usual approach.
That's clear talk, and I like clear talk. So thank you. Just going back to the structure of sustainable finance arrangements, and this is for anyone who wants to comment on this. But we have, and I'm going to combine a couple of questions here from Slido. So one is from Ruud, and Ruud is asking, okay, if you make use of a sustainable finance instrument, does that mean you get a lower borrowing cost? Do you get a do you get any advantages from having that particular label in there? And to add to this, because I think how do you structure a sustainability-linked loan? I think the other question is also very important. How do certification schemes like the RTRS actually play a role in these frameworks? How does that work? So let me just be very blunt and ask the panel, how can these people make money of being a member of the RTRS? Lianne.
Yes. Yeah, so going back to my last example, that actually is a sustainability-linked loan that we provided on the basis of the ASC certification in Chile. Of course, we could do this also based on the RTRS certification. And you can think of various solutions. So you can include certain steps towards RTRS certification, but you can also look at the amount or the share of RTRS certification, for example, of turnover. So I think there are various ways to include RTRS in sustainability linked financing, and I think they would also fit into the structure of IFC if you would look into including the RTRS certification level of the supplier. So that is clearly possible.
Good.
Martin, just building on this, because I think this is really the important point that we are discussing here. Are the rates really attractive so that we can make sustainable investments really fly? And I think that is tricky when you go to countries such as Brazil and others, when the local development banks also offer very attractive conditions. And I think things are starting to change and are starting to look more positive for banks such as IFC and Rabobank to compete in this let's say in this universe. Also because sustainability is going to be more valued. So I think the moment is positive now, but I would say that in the last years it was very difficult if a producer would say, okay, do I get a funding that from a local development bank with much lower restrictions on sustainability, or do I get a funding from an international bank with much higher restrictions? And then in the end, the interest rate is not that different. So the farmers at the end were dealing with that situation. And now when we have also the market require more sustainability from the products, and when also slowly the producing sector is seeing the added value of sustainability in a broader perspective, I think things are getting much more positive to all of the things we have been discussing today.
Very, 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 very true. So that's okay. Also a little bit crunchy. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
Maybe to add on that as well. In our business in Brazil and our financing to farmers, we broadly look at the sustainability performance of our farmers. So we have actually a comprehensive ENS assessment of our climates, and we already have included the RTRS also in that mechanism. So you simply get more points if you have an RTRS certification, and we use this assessment also for our pricing models.
Okay, that's good. So, but and this is another question, and then we need to sort of go towards the wrapping up stage. But is there also a possibility that what happens if a company fails to meet the KPIs or the targets? Do they pay more? What happens?
Yes, that is so. What we normally see in these type of structures is that it works two-sided. So you agree on a certain amount of KPIs in the financing. If you reach all of the KPIs, you will get a margin discount. But at the other end is that if you fail to meet these targets, then usually the discount is then a sort of a premium that you need to pay. So the structure really works two-sided. If you do well, you get a discount. If you don't perform according to the ambitions, you have to pay a premium.
Okay. So with all the talk of money, and please bear in mind, people, it's not only about getting financial discounts, it's also about getting karma points, also very important. But, you know, not downplaying the financial dimension there. We need to go and start to wrap up. And I realize now that we have far too little time to cover all of the questions that are in Slido. And but you know, keep them coming, and also I mean, we have all the email addresses of all the panelists, so if you have any further questions, you can reach out to them directly, and then continue the conversations. Now I would like to wrap up with a quote from the most recent Bob Dylan album, which is fantastic, by the way, Rough and Rowdy Ways. And in the song False Prophet, it's number 2, the track number 2, he's got, I ain't no false prophet, I just know what I know. Well, this is my last final ask to all the panelists. You're not a false prophet, you just know what you know. What is it that you know about sustainable finance in 1 minute and how it's going to change the world? And what do you need from all of us? And your first minute starts now, and I'm just going to start with Cassio.
Okay, thanks, Martin. So I think sustainable finance is now a reality. I've been in this field of sustainability for several years, dealing with this deforestation here in Brazil through my other jobs. I think not now, when the money is going to become more scarce, also because of COVID and everything, I think it's a time that sustainable finance will make all the decision, will make it will be critical so that the producing sector can get the funding that they need. I think the time is a good timing for sustainable finance. The good tools are out there. There are a lot of innovations, and I think it's a moment where funding is more scarce, and that will somehow support sustainable finance.
Excellent. Justin, come on in.
Hard to beat that, Cassio, but because I agree with it completely. It's a win-win. And I go back to my point of Darwinism, of survival of the fittest, because this is exactly what this is. And so, you know, and we touched on it very lightly about accessing cheaper capital, but it's proven to be, from issuer to issuer to issuer, that there's a price to be had. So the karma is important, but also is the cheaper capital. So that's where sustainable finance is taking us, and it delivers a better world for us all in the long run for future generations.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Now, Lianne?
Yes, to me, client engagement. So I think sustainable finance really is a powerful tool to engage with your suppliers, so supply chain. So it's not only about getting karma points or getting cheaper funding, it's also understanding what is needed to really make the supply chain more sustainable. What are the hurdles? What are the investment needed? And then if we really understand what the hurdles are and what the investments are that we need, then we will find a way to actually finance them.
Very good. Excellent. Jessica, you're not a false prophet. You know what you know. What is it? We can't really hear you. Maybe turn it up a little bit.
Sorry about that. So to me, it's very clear that sustainable finance has come a long way in the past couple of years, and I think long-term partnerships, both with buyers and suppliers and financial institutions on the sustainability front is needed. So that if, you know, what we see as important sustainability objectives today are not the forefront of the forefront issues of sustainability 10 years from now, these long-standing partnerships between all of these different entities will help us realize what are sustainability objectives now and where do we need to get to. So I think, you know, as much as we can do it now, we'll make the future easier for all parties.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those reflections. I guess my wrap up will just be, I hope, well, we have given enough to the audience to really think about how finance can actually contribute to making the world a better place. And indeed, save the planet, always ask for the RTRS label. And I'm hereby handing it over back to James.
Great. Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you to all the panelists. It's been a really fantastic webinar. A final quick message before I hand over to Marina. So just one about social media. And I'll just share my screen now. We're really keen for people to keep the conversation going after this. So you'll see here a series of tags and hashtags, tweeting, LinkedIn. Please reach out to these different spaces to keep the dialogue going. We haven't been able to answer your questions. Do reach out to the Secretariat, speak to Laura, speak to Marcelo, speak to other colleagues from the Secretariat, and we really look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. So over to you, Marina, for the close.
Thank you, James. And I honestly believe this has been a very valuable interaction. I'm sure we're leaving the meeting with more information and more tools than we have when we started. And I hope everyone feels just the same. Thanks again for your interest in attending. Please stay tuned for invitations to upcoming sessions of this 2020 RTRS webinar series. We look forward to seeing you all again, as well as other organizations and colleagues in future webinars. It's all of us together that make these meetings more meaningful and valuable. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye. Thank you. See you soon.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.